In 1954, a woman in Ohio could feed her whole family for $1 using foods that have almost vanished from American kitchens. Number 46 was so beloved that 2 bars still fight over who invented it. Number 95 fed coal miners for 100 years, then disappeared. These 100 dishes, 2 from every single state, were the taste of growing up American. Then supermarkets, freezers, and drive-thrus made us forget them all. Hit that subscribe button and let us bring back 100 forgotten foods, 2 from every state. 1. Alabama, Lane cake. This was the cake a Southern woman brought out only when she wanted to prove something. A tall, snow-white sponge split into layers and filled with a mixture of raisins, chopped pecans, and shredded coconut, all bound together with egg yolks and a heavy, unapologetic pour of bourbon. A woman named Emma Relander Lane baked it, entered it in a county fair down in Alabama back in the 1890s, and won the blue ribbon, and from that day it carried her name. It was so woven into the fabric of the South that Harper Lee wrote it straight into To Kill a Mockingbird, where a neighbor bakes one so loaded with shinny it made you tight. That was the whole point. The bourbon soaked down into the crumb over 2 or 3 days on the counter, so by the time you cut it, every forkful was rich, boozy, and grown up in a way a plain cake never was. Making one took the better part of an afternoon and a good half-dozen eggs, which is exactly why nobody makes it anymore. We traded that afternoon of care for a box mix and a tub of frosting, and a whole piece of Alabama went quiet. 2. Alabama West Indies salad. Down on the Gulf Coast around Mobile, this was the dish that told you summer had arrived, and it broke every rule a modern cook thinks a seafood salad has to follow. There was no mayonnaise, no cooking, no fuss. A cook took fresh lump crab meat, still sweet from the boat, and layered it in a bowl with thin-sliced raw onion, salt, and black pepper. Then, and this is the strange genius of it, she poured over a simple dressing of vegetable oil, cider vinegar, and a cup of ice water, covered the bowl, and let it sit overnight in the icebox. That cold bath of vinegar and water married the crab and the onion into something bright, briny, and unbelievably clean-tasting, like eating the Gulf breeze itself. A man named Bill Bailey is said to have invented it in the 1940s at his restaurant on the Mobile Highway. For families along that coast, it was potluck food, holiday food, the thing you carried to a gathering in a covered dish. Yet drive 50 miles inland, and people have never heard of it, and most Americans would stare at that bowl of onion and crab and never guess it was one of the great regional salads of the country. 3. Alaska Akutak. Long before there was a single ice cream truck rolling through an Alaskan village, the native peoples of the far north made their own frozen treat, and they made it out of survival itself. They took animal fat, seal, caribou, or moose, and whipped it by hand, sometimes for an hour, until it turned pale and fluffy. Into that, they folded fresh, clean snow and handfuls of wild berries picked all summer long, salmon berries, blueberries, and the tiny black crowberries that grew low to the tundra. The result was light, cold, and faintly sweet, and they called it Eskimo ice cream, though the Yupik word akutak simply means something mixed together. This was never just dessert. It was survival food packed with the fat a body needed to fight the cold. It was celebration food served at weddings and namings, and it was funeral food shared to comfort the grieving. Whole families depended on the berries a grandmother had put away. It carried the deep knowledge of a people who fed themselves for thousands of years in a place no grocery store could reach. As freezers and store-bought ice cream moved into the villages, the old, hand-whipped akutak began to fade, and with it, a piece of one of the oldest food traditions in North America. 4. Alaska sourdough hotcakes. During the Great Klondike Gold Rush, a prospector heading into the frozen interior guarded one possession above almost all others: his crock of sourdough starter. That living mixture of flour, water, and wild yeast was so precious and so vulnerable to freezing that men carried it inside their coats against their own skin at night to keep it alive, and old-timers earned the nickname sourdoughs because of it. Every single morning, that starter earned its keep. A cook would spoon a cup of it into a bowl, stir in flour, a little sugar, an egg if he had one, and a pinch of soda to cut the tang, and pour thick batter onto a griddle blazing over the fire. The hotcakes came out golden, chewy, and sour in the best possible way, fuel for a brutal day of digging in the cold. What makes this remarkable is that some of those starters never died. Families in Alaska today still bake with mother starters that are over 100 years old, passed down through 4 or 5 generations, carrying the same wild yeast the first miners fed. That is living history you can taste. As boxed pancake mix and instant yeast took over America's kitchens, the patience of keeping a starter alive slipped away, and those 100-year-old crocks grow rarer every year. 5. Arizona cheese crisp. Walk into almost any old Mexican restaurant in Tucson 40 or 50 years ago, and before you even ordered, a cheese crisp might land on your table, and it ruined you for regular chips forever. It was almost nothing, which is what made it perfect. A cook took a big flour tortilla, laid it flat on a pizza pan, blanketed it edge to edge with grated Longhorn or Colby cheese, and slid it under a hot broiler. In a couple of minutes, the cheese bubbled and browned, the tortilla went brittle and blistered, and the whole thing came out flat and golden and shattering, so crisp it cracked like glass when you broke off a wedge. Some places dusted it with a little green chile or a shake of oregano, but the plain one needed nothing at all. It cost the restaurant almost nothing to make, cheaper than a basket of chips and salsa. So for decades, it was the free or nearly free starter that welcomed you and your family the moment you sat down. It was Tucson childhood on a plate. As the old family-run Sonoran restaurants closed one by one and chains moved in with their standardized menus, the humble cheese crisp quietly disappeared, and now you can drive a long way before you find a real one. 6. Arizona chimichanga. The story goes that sometime around the 1950s, in a Tucson kitchen, a cook accidentally dropped a rolled burrito into a vat of hot oil, started to swear, caught herself in front of the children, and blurted out something like chimichanga instead, a made-up nonsense word. Whether that tale is true or not, the dish it named became a beloved cornerstone of Arizona Sonoran cooking. You take a flour tortilla, wrap it snugly around a filling of shredded beef, or chicken, beans, and sometimes potato, fold it into a tight little parcel, and deep fry it until the outside turns blistered, golden, and crackling crisp. Then it gets smothered, buried under melted cheese, red or green chili sauce, sour cream, and guacamole, until you need a fork and knife and a serious appetite. It was the special occasion order, the thing you got when plain tacos would not do, rich and enormous and a little bit decadent. For years, it was on every Arizona menu and spread across the whole Southwest. But the fresh, hand-rolled, made-to-order version, the one built from real shredded meat and fried crisp that minute, has grown harder and harder to find, crowded out by soggy, frozen imitations that carry the name but none of the magic. Number 7. Arkansas chocolate gravy. Up in the Ozark Hills, Sunday morning had a smell, and that smell was chocolate gravy bubbling in a cast-iron skillet. This was not fudge sauce, and it was not pudding. A mother whisked together cocoa powder, sugar, flour, and a little salt, poured in milk, and stirred over the heat until it thickened into a warm, dark, glossy gravy, silky and just barely sweet. Then she ladled it, hot and pouring, over a plate of split buttermilk. Biscuits fresh from the oven, and maybe dropped a pat of butter on top to melt down into it. Children ate it like dessert for breakfast and could not believe their luck. It was a poor family's treat, built from 4 cheap pantry staples that cost only pennies, and it could stretch to feed a whole table full of hungry kids on a Sunday when there was no money for anything fancier. Handwritten recipe cards for it got passed between Arkansas grandmothers and daughters, rarely written down in any real cookbook because it was too humble, too homemade to bother. Step outside the hill country and describe chocolate gravy on a biscuit, and people look at you like you invented it on the spot. They simply do not believe it was ever real. It was. Number 8, Arkansas fried pies. Before there was a bakery on every corner, an Arkansas farm woman turned the dried fruit hanging in her pantry into hand pies, and they were miles better than anything wrapped in plastic today. She would take dried apples or dried peaches, the fruit she had put up herself when the trees came in, and simmer them soft with a little sugar and cinnamon until they collapsed into a thick, jammy filling. Then she rolled out rounds of dough, spooned the fruit onto one half, folded them over into little half moons, and crimped the edges shut with the tines of a fork. Into a skillet of hot lard or oil they went, 2 or 3 at a time, sizzling until the crust blistered up golden and crisp, and the fruit inside went molten. She made them by the dozen, because a family could go through a dozen fast, and they carried in a lunch pail or a coat pocket out to the fields. That golden, flaky, fruit-filled pie you held in your hand was the taste of a hard-working home. The sad, greasy, cardboard-tasting fried pies you find spinning under a heat lamp at a gas station now are a distant, hollow echo of the real thing an Ozark grandmother pulled from her skillet. Number 9, California, Chiopino. Down on the wharves of San Francisco in the late 1800s, the Italian fishermen, many of them from Genoa, ended each day with a pot of whatever had not sold. When a boat came in, the men would go chip in a handful of the day's catch, crab, clams, mussels, shrimp, and chunks of firm fish, and it all went into one big communal pot with tomatoes, garlic, olive oil, wine, and herbs. That chip-in is very likely where the name Chiopino came from. It simmered on the dock into a deep red, briny stew that smelled like the entire harbor, and the men ate it out of tin bowls with crusty sourdough to sop up every last drop. It was working man's food, built from the scraps and the unsold, costing next to nothing, meant to fill the bellies of tired fishermen at the end of a cold day on the water. And here is the turn. That humble fisherman's supper is now a special on white tablecloth menus. A bowl of it running $40 or $50, sold as a rustic delicacy. The dish never changed. Only our memory of where it came from and who it was really for quietly slipped away. Number 10, California, date shake. Out in the California desert, in the hot stretch of the Coachella Valley around Palm Springs in Indio, the roadside date farms invented a drink that tasted like pure liquid sunshine. Growers there raised sticky, honey-sweet medjool and deglet noor dates, fruit most Americans have still never tasted fresh, and they needed a way to sell them to the tourists rolling by on the highway. So they blended the dates, soft and caramel rich, with cold milk and a scoop of vanilla ice cream, and whipped it into a thick, cool shake flecked with tiny bits of date. It came out tasting like a milkshake crossed with butterscotch and brown sugar, unbelievably smooth, and it was the perfect thing to drink in a 110-degree desert afternoon. Travelers cruising Old Highway 111 learned to pull over at the date gardens just for one, and the fruit stands built whole reputations on that single drink. For a certain generation of Californians, it was the taste of a family road trip, of the desert, of a specific slow and sun-baked stretch of the state. But most of the country never even tasted a real date, let alone a shake made from one, and outside that little desert valley, the date shake remains a nearly forgotten regional treasure. 11. Colorado Denver omelet. This was the omelet that ended up on nearly every diner menu in America, and almost nobody remembers it started as a piece of frontier problem-solving. The classic version is straightforward: ham, diced onion, and green bell pepper folded into beaten eggs, cooked until just set. But the story behind it goes back to the chuck wagons and railroad camps of the Old West, where cooks feeding hungry crews had a problem. Eggs did not keep well on the trail, and after a few days they took on an off flavor. The fix was to chop them into a scramble with strong ingredients, onion, pepper, and salty ham, that could cover any staleness, then fold the whole thing into a biscuit or bread for a hearty handheld breakfast that traveled. Some say it began as a Denver sandwich before it ever became an omelet. Either way, it caught on because it was cheap, filling, and used what a working camp had on hand. From those rough beginnings, it spread across the country and became a diner standard for most of the 20th century. Yet ask a young person today about a Denver omelet, and you often get a blank look. The name has faded from the everyday, one more piece of plain, honest American cooking slipping quietly out of our memory. 12. Colorado green chile, smothered burrito. In Colorado, especially in the southern part of the state and down toward Pueblo, green chile is not a topping, it is a way of life, and the smothered burrito was its greatest expression. A cook would roast Pueblo or hatch green chiles until the skins blistered black, peel them and simmer them down with pork, onion, garlic, and a little flour into a thick, pourable green gravy that carried a slow, earthy, building heat. Then a fat flour tortilla stuffed with beans, meat, and potato got laid on a plate and completely drowned, smothered in that green chile, blanketed with melted cheese, and sent out so soft and saucy you could only eat it with a fork. The smell of chiles roasting filled entire neighborhoods every autumn, when families bought them by the bushel sack and put them up for the year. This was working-class food, dished out cheap at little family restaurants and home kitchens alike, long before anyone thought to call regional Mexican-American cooking cuisine or put it on a trendy menu. It fed steelworkers and farmhands and generations of families across southern Colorado. And while green chile still has a devoted following there, the old-style, home-roasted, pork-thickened smother is a labor of love that fewer and fewer people take the time to make. 13. Connecticut steamed cheeseburger. Here is a hamburger unlike any other in America, and it exists in only one small pocket of central Connecticut around the town of Meriden. Instead of grilling or frying the patty, the cook places it into a little slotted metal tray inside a boxy steam cabinet and lets the steam cook it through. In a separate slot, a chunk of sharp cheddar sits steaming until it melts into a hot, gooey, almost pourable pool. When the burger is done, gray and juicy with none of the browning a grill gives, it goes onto a hard roll and gets crowned with a thick, molten spoonful of that steamed cheese, so soft it runs down your hand. It has no sear, no crust, no crispy edges, and to an outsider raised on flame-grilled burgers, it sounds almost wrong. But to the people who grew up on it, that tender, steamy, intensely cheesy burger is home. And a handful of old lunch counters have made it exactly this way for 100 years. The trouble is that these places are few, family-run, and getting older, and every time one of them closes its doors for good, this strange and wonderful little burger, found nowhere else on earth, moves one step closer to vanishing completely. 14. Connecticut New Haven. White clam pizza. In New Haven, they do not even call it pizza, they call it a pizza, and their white clam pie is considered by a lot of serious eaters to be one of the finest pizzas ever made in this country. It starts with a crust baked in a blistering coal-fired oven, so it comes out thin, chewy, and a charred black in spots along the edges, with a smoky flavor a regular oven simply cannot produce. Then, and this is the shock, there is no tomato sauce at all. The baker brushes the dough with olive oil, scatters on minced garlic, grated hard cheese, and a shower of oregano, and tops it with fresh clams, shucked that day, often from nearby Long Island Sound. It bakes until the clams are just cooked and the crust is crackling. A legendary spot named Frank Pepe's has been turning these out since 1925 with lines out the door. The result is briny, garlicky, smoky, and utterly unlike the cheese and sauce pizza most Americans grew up on. And that is exactly the problem. Because it looks and tastes so different, most of the country has never tried a real one. And this genuine American masterpiece stays locked inside one proud little corner of Connecticut. 15. Delaware, chicken, and slippery dumplings. On the Delmarva Peninsula, where Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia all come together in flat farm country, Sunday dinner often meant chicken and slippery dumplings, and the word slippery is the whole secret. These were nothing like the fluffy biscuit-style dumplings you drop into a pot elsewhere in America. Here, a cook made a simple dough of flour, water, and a little fat, rolled it out thin, and cut it into flat squares, almost like a wide, rustic noodle. Those squares went into a pot of rich chicken broth, thickened by the flour they released, and simmered until they turned soft, silky, and heavy, sliding off your fork, which is exactly how they earned the name slippery. Pulled chicken went back into the pot, and the whole thing became a thick, comforting, pale stew that stuck to your ribs on a cold day. It was cheap, it stretched one stewing hen to feed a big family, and it was made almost entirely from scratch, so it took real time and real hands. That handmade, rolled and cut slippery dumpling is a regional tradition passed down through Delmarva families, and as convenience food took over the weeknight table, fewer and fewer people bother to roll out the dough, and the dish grows quieter every year. 16. Delaware, peach pie. It surprises people to learn that tiny Delaware was once one of the great peach-growing states in the whole country. In the middle of the 1800s, the state's orchards exploded, and at the peak, Delaware had millions of peach trees, so many that special railroad lines and steamboats were built just to rush the fragile fruit to city markets before it spoiled. The peach became so central to the state's identity that the peach blossom is Delaware's state flower to this day. And in every farmhouse kitchen, all that fruit turned into pie. When the trees came in and the peaches ripened faster than anyone could eat them, women peeled and sliced them by the bushel and baked them into deep, bubbling, golden pies with a lattice crust on top, the juices running sweet and thick. It was the taste of a Delaware summer and the pride of a whole agricultural economy. Then, late in the 1800s, a plant disease called the yellows swept through and devastated the orchards, and the great Delaware peach industry collapsed. The trees mostly disappeared, and as they went, so did the everyday farmhouse peach pie. A whole state's identity was once baked into that crust, and now hardly anyone remembers it was ever there. 17. Florida. Key lime pie. Before electric refrigeration ever reached the remote Florida Keys, the cooks down there invented a dessert out of pure necessity, and it turned out to be one of the smartest pieces of kitchen chemistry in American cooking. There were no dairy cows on those little islands, so fresh milk and cream were scarce, but canned, sweetened, condensed milk kept forever on a shelf. And growing all around were the small, yellow, intensely tart key limes. Some clever cook discovered that when you whisk that condensed milk together with key lime juice and egg yolks, the acid in the juice reacts with the milk and thickens it, actually cooking and setting the filling with no oven heat at all. Poured into a crust, often made from crushed graham crackers, and chilled, it's set into a smooth, tangy, custardy pie. That was the genius. A rich dessert in a place with no fresh cream, and at first no way to bake reliably. A real key lime pie is pale yellow from the egg yolks and the juice, never bright green, and it balances sweet and sour on a knife's edge. Today, most so-called key lime pies are dyed green, made from bottled juice, and taste of nothing in particular. The honest, pale, mouth-puckering original is a genuine rarity. 18. Florida smoked mullet. Long before Florida meant theme parks and chain seafood restaurants, it meant fishing villages along the Gulf Coast, and the fish those working families ate was mullet, a cheap, oily, humble fish that the fancy restaurants would not touch. The old Florida crackers and the fishing families knew better. They would catch mullet by the netful, split them, and smoke them slowly over smoldering wood, often buttonwood, until the flesh turned a deep bronze and grew firm and flaky, rich with smoke and oil. Smoked whole, it was pulled apart and eaten right off the skin. But the real magic was smoked mullet dip. The flaked fish, mashed together with mayonnaise, onion, a squeeze of lemon, and a good shake of hot sauce, spread on saltine crackers. It was the taste of a Friday fish fry, of the fish camps and dockside shacks, of an old Florida that existed long before the tourists came. It cost almost nothing because mullet was so plentiful and so cheap. As the coast developed and glossy chain seafood joints replaced the family fish camps, that smoky, oily, deeply local flavor got pushed to the margins. And today, most visitors to Florida will never taste the humble fish that once fed the whole coast. 19. Georgia boiled peanuts. To someone from anywhere else, a boiled peanut is a baffling, soggy thing, but to a Georgian, it is childhood, summer, and home all rolled into one. You start with green, or raw peanuts, fresh out of the ground, still in the shell, not the dry roasted kind. Those go into a huge pot of heavily salted water and simmer for hours, sometimes half a day, until the shells go soft and the nuts inside turn tender, briny, and almost bean-like, nothing at all like a crunchy roasted peanut. Down south, they have been made this way since at least the Civil War era, a cheap way to use up peanuts that would not keep. All through a Georgia summer, you would find them sold hot from big kettles at roadside stands, and later from crock pots bubbling away next to the register at country gas stations, scooped into a soggy brown paper bag that soaked through by the time you got to the car. You cracked them open with your fingers, slurped the salty liquor, and ate the soft nut inside, tossing shells out the window down a dirt road. They are messy, salty, and utterly regional. To the rest of the country, they seem strange, but to a Georgian, they are the taste of every summer they ever had. 20. Georgia Brunswick stew. In Georgia and a stretch of the South around it, Brunswick stew was the thick, smoky pot that turned up wherever a community gathered. It began, the old stories say, as a hunter's stew, made with whatever meat came off the hunt and cooked down for hours in a big cast iron pot over a fire. By the time it settled into the version most people remember, it was built on pulled pork or chicken, often the smoky scraps left from a barbecue, simmered with corn, lima beans, tomatoes, onions, and a tangy, peppery sauce until everything melted together and a spoon could practically stand up in it. It was barbecue joint food, ladled out alongside the ribs and pulled pork, and it was church fundraiser and political rally food, cooked in kettles big enough to feed a whole county, with a couple of men taking turns stirring it with a wooden paddle the size of an oar. That long, slow cooking and the smoky barbecue meat gave it a depth you simply cannot rush. It was community food, the taste of a gathering, of a whole town coming together over a fire. The thin, sweet, canned stuff that carries the name on grocery shelves today misses every bit of what made the real pot so beloved. First, pattern break. Here is what these first 20 foods already tell you. Almost none of them were invented by chefs. They were invented by tired people, immigrants, fishermen, farm wives, prospectors, folks with more time than money, who looked at whatever was cheap and about to spoil and turned it into supper. That is the real story of American food. Not the celebrity kitchens, not the cooking shows, but a woman standing at a stove figuring out how to feed 6 people on $1 and make it taste like love. Every dish on this list is a small act of that same quiet genius, and every one of them we are letting slip away. 21. Hawaii Loco Moco. This is the ultimate Hawaiian comfort plate, and like so much great food, it was invented to feed hungry teenagers who wanted a lot for a little. The story goes that in the late 1940s, in the town of Hilo on the Big Island, a group of teenage kids asked a local restaurant for something cheap, filling, and different from a sandwich. What the cooks came up with was pure genius in its simplicity. A scoop of hot white rice on a plate, a fried hamburger patty on top of that, a fried egg on top of that, and the whole tower drowned in rich brown gravy. When you break the runny yolk, it runs down through the gravy and into the rice, and every bite is savory, hearty, and deeply satisfying. It cost almost nothing. It filled up a growing kid, and it quickly spread to lunch counters and drive-ins all across the islands, where it became a true local staple, as Hawaiian as anything gets. Over the years, cooks added their own touches: Spam, teriyaki, kalua pork, but the original beef, egg, and gravy version remains the classic. On the mainland, though, most Americans have never even heard the name, and this beloved island plate stays a delicious secret. 22. Hawaii, POI. Long before any other food arrived on the Hawaiian Islands, there was POI, and to the native Hawaiians it was far more than something to eat. It is made from the taro root, called kelo, which is steamed until soft and then pounded, traditionally with a stone pounder on a wooden board, and mixed with water until it becomes a smooth, thick, purplish-gray paste. Depending on how long it sits and ferments, it ranges from mild and starchy to noticeably sour and tangy. You eat it with your fingers, and it is described by how many fingers you need to scoop it, 2-finger poi or 3-finger poi. But the deeper meaning is what matters. In Hawaiian tradition, kelo is sacred, considered an elder sibling of the Hawaiian people themselves, a direct link to the ancestors and to the land. When a bowl of poi was on the table, it was said the family should set aside its quarrels out of respect. It was the staff of life, the food that connected people to their gods, their genealogy, and their islands. As imported white rice, fast food, and processed products flooded in, poi got pushed to the edges of its own homeland, and this ancient sacred food is eaten far less than it once was. 23. Idaho, finger steaks. Idaho is famous the world over for its potatoes, but ask someone who grew up there about a hometown specialty, and a lot of them will name finger steaks, a dish that barely exists anywhere else. They are strips of beef, usually cut from cheaper cuts or trimmings, dredged in a seasoned batter and deep fried until crisp and golden, like a beefy cousin of the chicken tender. Credit for inventing them usually goes to a chef named Milo Bybee at a Boise supper club back in the 1950s, who was looking for a way to use up beef scraps and turn them into something a customer would pay for. It worked. Served hot with a side of cocktail sauce or the famous local fry sauce for dipping, finger steaks became bar food and family food all across Idaho, showing up at taverns, drive-ins, and county fairs. Crisp on the outside, tender and beefy inside, they were the kind of thing you ordered by the basket and shared around a table. But step one stayed over in almost any direction and mentioned finger steaks, and people have no idea what you are talking about. It is one of those foods that a whole state grew up on, while the rest of the country never even learned it existed. 24. Idaho, fry sauce. It sounds like the simplest thing in the world, and it is, but fry sauce is so beloved in Idaho and the surrounding Intermountain West that people who grew up there genuinely assumed the entire country had it. At its most basic, it is just ketchup and mayonnaise stirred together into a creamy pinkish-orange sauce, sometimes with a splash of pickle brine, a little barbecue sauce, or a dash of seasoning worked in. And that humble mixture is the one true condiment for French fries and burgers across the region. Drive-ins and burger joints all over Idaho and Utah served it with everything, kept it in squeeze bottles on every table, and a generation of kids dunked their fries in it without a second thought. It was so normal, so everyday, that it never occurred to them it was regional at all, until they moved away, asked for fry sauce somewhere else, and got a blank stare. That little jolt of surprise, realizing that a food you thought was universal is actually a local secret, is exactly the feeling this whole list is about. As national chains with their own standardized condiments spread, the homemade house recipe fry sauce that each local spot took pride in has slowly been fading from the menus. 25. Illinois horseshoe sandwich. Down in Springfield, Illinois, the state capital, there is a sandwich so gloriously excessive that it needs a fork, a knife, and an appetite you have been building all day. It is called the horseshoe, and it is built in layers. First, thick slices of toasted bread. On top of that, a hamburger patty or ham or fried chicken or whatever meat you chose. Piled on top of the meat, a heaping mountain of French fries. And over the whole towering plate, a river of thick, warm cheese sauce, usually a sharp cheddar or a Welsh rarebit-style sauce, poured until everything is buried. The name comes from the shape. The slab of meat was said to look like a horseshoe, and the fries stuck up like the nails. It was invented in Springfield back in the 1920s as a hearty, filling lunch, a half horseshoe for a smaller appetite, and it became the unofficial signature dish of the city, served in diners and taverns all over town. It is enormous, messy, and completely over the top in the best way. But it stayed almost entirely local. Travel outside central Illinois and mention a horseshoe sandwich, and to most Americans, it is a complete mystery, a delicious regional legend hiding in the middle of the country. 26. Illinois Italian beef. In Chicago, the Italian beef sandwich is a working-class masterpiece born of stretching cheap meat as far as it could go. Italian immigrant families, feeding big crowds at weddings and gatherings during lean times, learned to take a tough, inexpensive cut of beef, roast it, and slice it paper thin so a little went a long way. That thin-sliced beef simmered in a garlicky, herby, seasoned broth called gravy or juice, soaking up all that flavor. Then it got piled onto a sturdy Italian roll and topped either with sweet roasted peppers or with spicy giardiniera, a pickled mix of peppers and vegetables in oil. And here is the signature move. You could order it dipped or wet, where the whole sandwich, roll and all, gets plunged back into the pot of beef juice until it is dripping and soft, so messy you have to eat it leaning over the counter in the classic Italian stance. It was cheap, filling, and packed with flavor, exactly what a factory worker or tradesman needed for lunch. For generations, it fed Chicago's neighborhoods. And while it is finally getting some national attention now, for most of its life, the rest of the country completely slept on this dripping, garlicky, glorious sandwich. 27. Indiana breaded pork tenderloin. In Indiana and across much of the Midwest, the breaded pork tenderloin sandwich is a point of genuine local pride, and the first time you see one, you laugh out loud at the sheer size of it. A cook takes a piece of pork loin, pounds it out with a mallet until it is thin and wide, sometimes as big as a dinner plate, dredges it in seasoned flour and breadcrumbs, and fries it until it is crisp and golden brown. Then, in a wonderful bit of Midwestern absurdity, that giant crispy cutlet gets served on a regular-sized hamburger bun, so the meat hangs out over the edges by inches on every side, dwarfing the bread entirely. You dress it simply with mustard, pickle, and onion, and eat your way in from the overhanging edges toward the bun in the middle. It has German roots, a descendant of the schnitzel brought over by immigrants, and it became a fixture at Hoosier diners, drive-ins, and especially at county and state fairs, where a good tenderloin is a summer tradition. It is crispy, savory, comforting, and comically oversized. Outside the Midwest, people simply cannot believe how big it is, and this proud regional sandwich remains largely unknown to the rest of America. 28. Indiana sugar cream pie. Sometimes called Hoosier pie, sugar cream pie is Indiana's unofficial state dessert, and it is a small miracle of making something wonderful out of almost nothing. The recipe has roots among the Quaker and Amish settlers of Indiana, frugal people who could whip up a satisfying pie even when the pantry was nearly empty, which is why it earned the nickname Desperation Pie. There is no fruit and there are no eggs. The filling is simply cream, sugar, a little flour or cornstarch to thicken it, a touch of vanilla, and often a dusting of nutmeg on top. In the old style, you did not even mix it in a bowl. You stirred the filling right in the unbaked pie shell with your finger, then baked it until it just barely set into a soft, trembling, custard-like center under a lightly browned top. The result is silky, sweet, and rich, comforting in the plainest and most homemade way. It fed Indiana families for generations, cheap and easy, and made from staples every kitchen had. But as store-bought and boxed desserts took over, this humble, eggless cream pie faded, and today almost nobody outside Indiana has ever tasted one, and even there, fewer and fewer people still bake it. 29. Iowa loose meat sandwich. An Iowa loose meat sandwich looks, at first glance, like a sloppy Joe. But say that to an Iowan and you will get corrected quickly because there is no sauce, and that is the entire point. Instead of being bound in a sweet tomato sauce, the ground beef is cooked loose, seasoned simply with onion, salt, and pepper, and browned until it is crumbly and just barely moist, then scooped onto a soft hamburger bun. You dress it yourself, typically with yellow mustard, chopped onion, chapguan, and dill pickles, and it stays satisfyingly plain and beefy, with the loose meat spilling out of the bun with every bite. It is sometimes called a tavern sandwich, and the famous Made Right chain, which has been operating in Iowa since the 1920s, built a whole state's worth of memories around it, serving it up cheap and steamy at counters across the state. It was affordable, unpretentious, and deeply nostalgic, the taste of a small-town Iowa lunch counter. As burger chains multiplied and their flashy, sauced-up sandwiches took over, the humble, sauceless, loose meat sandwich got squeezed to the margins, kept alive mostly by a few beloved old-timers and the Iowans who refused to let it disappear. 30. Iowa Scotcheroos. Ask almost anyone who grew up in Iowa or the surrounding Midwest to name a treat from every church, potluck, school bake sale, and family gathering of their childhood, and a lot of them will say Scotcheroos. They are a no-bake bar cookie, and the recipe famously appeared on the back of a cereal box, which is exactly how it spread into so many kitchens. You melt together sugar and corn syrup, stir in peanut butter, and fold in crispy rice cereal until every piece is coated, then press the sticky mixture into a pan. While that sets, you melt together chocolate chips and butterscotch chips. That butterscotch is where the scotch in Scotcheroos comes from, and spread the glossy mixture over the top. Once it firms up, you cut it into squares that are chewy, crunchy, sweet, and rich all at once, with the peanut butter and butterscotch playing off the chocolate. They were cheap to make, required no oven, and traveled well in a 9x13 pan covered in foil, which made them the perfect thing to bring to a crowd. For a whole generation of Midwestern kids, they were pure happiness. Yet outside that region, plenty of Americans have never heard of them, and this beloved back-of-the-box treat is slowly slipping out of the rotation. 31. Kansas, bieroks. Out on the wheat fields of Kansas, the bierok is a handheld meal with a history that stretches all the way back across the ocean. It was brought to the plains in the 1870s and the 1880s by the Volga Germans, ethnic Germans who had lived in Russia and then emigrated to Kansas, carrying their recipes with them. A bierok is a pocket of soft, enriched bread dough wrapped completely around a savory filling of ground beef, shredded cabbage, and onion, seasoned simply, then baked until the outside is golden and the inside is hot and juicy. Because the filling is sealed entirely inside the bread, it made the ideal food to carry out to the fields during the long harvest, staying warm for hours and needing no plate or fork, a self-contained lunch a farmer could eat with one hand. Whole communities of Kansas families made them by the dozen, and they became a beloved staple, tied deeply to the immigrant heritage of the region. As families moved off the farms and quick store-bought convenience food took over the everyday meal, the tradition of an afternoon spent making a big batch of bieroks from scratch has faded, and this warm, hearty piece of Kansas heritage is made far less often than it once was. 32. Kansas fried chicken and cream gravy. Before there was a fast food fried chicken bucket on every corner, there was the real thing. And in Kansas, one of the temples of it was the old Brookville Hotel, which served skillet fried chicken family style for over a century. This was fried chicken as a whole event. The chicken was cut up, seasoned, dredged in flour, and fried in cast iron skillets, not deep fryers, so it came out with a craggy, golden, deeply flavorful crust and juicy meat inside. It arrived at the table family style, on platters passed around, alongside mashed potatoes, and, crucially, a boat of peppery cream gravy made from the flour and drippings left in the pan. Gravy you could ask them to keep refilling. Add biscuits, sweet and sour coleslaw, and you had the Sunday after church feast that defined small-town prairie hospitality. It was generous, homemade, and unhurried, the kind of meal that anchored a community. Real skillet-fried chicken like this takes skill, patience, and attention, standing over hot fat and turning each piece by hand, and it is very much a dying art. As the old family restaurants closed and fried chicken became a thing you grabbed in a paper box from a drive-thru, that from-scratch cream gravy Sunday tradition quietly faded away. 33. Kentucky, hot brown. The hot brown is an open-faced sandwich so rich and so elegant that it feels like a dish from another era, which it is. Born at the Brown Hotel in Louisville, Kentucky, back in the 1920s. In those days, the hotel hosted big dinner dances, and around midnight, the hungry crowd wanted something more interesting than the usual ham and eggs. The chef, a man named Fred Schmidt, answered with the hot brown. He laid slices of roast turkey over toast, blanketed the whole thing in a thick, creamy Mornay cheese sauce, and ran it under the broiler until the sauce bubbled and browned on top. Then he crowned it with tomato and crisp bacon. The result was warm, decadent, and comforting, the melting cheese sauce soaking down into the toast, the bacon and tomato cutting the richness. It was a stroke of genius, using humble ingredients, turkey, toast, cheese sauce, to make something that felt luxurious, and it became the hotel's signature dish and a Kentucky classic. But a true hot brown is a bit of work, and it belongs to a slower, more formal age of dining. Most people today have never had a proper one made the original way, and this bubbling, elegant Louisville creation has largely faded into a piece of local history. 34. Kentucky, burgoo. Burgoo is Kentucky's great communal stew, a dish born from the frontier idea that you cook whatever you have, together in one enormous pot for as long as it takes. In the old days, that meant game. Whatever the hunters brought in, mutton, squirrel, chicken, pork, cooked down for the better part of a day with corn, beans, potatoes, and other vegetables, stirred over an open fire until every ingredient surrendered and the whole thing melted into a thick, hearty, deeply savory stew. Nobody could quite tell you what one specific meat was in it, and that was the charm. It became the food of big outdoor gatherings, political rallies, church picnics, and barbecues, cooked in cast-iron kettles so large that men took turns stirring with long wooden paddles, feeding hundreds of people at once. Every cook and every county had its own guarded recipe, and folks still argue passionately over what truly belongs in a proper burgoo and what does not. It was community itself, poured into a bowl, the taste of a whole town gathering together over a slow fire. As those big communal cook-ups grew rarer and everyday life sped up, burgoo faded from common tables, and this old, soulful, argued-over stew is fading fast from living memory. 35. Louisiana, boudin. In the Cajun heartland of South Louisiana, boudin is not a fancy restaurant dish. It is everyday soul food, sold hot from the coolers and steam trays of gas stations, meat markets, and little roadside stops all across Acadiana. It is a sausage, but unlike any sausage most Americans know. The casing is stuffed with a mixture of cooked pork, sometimes pork liver, cooked rice, and the holy trinity of Cajun cooking, onions, celery, and bell pepper, all seasoned boldly with garlic, green onion, and plenty of black and cayenne pepper. The result is soft, rich, spicy, and savory, with the rice giving it a texture completely different from a firm link sausage. And the way you eat it is pure Louisiana. You do not even need a plate. You buy a hot link, squeeze the warm filling straight out of the casing and into your mouth, and eat it right there in the car, casing and all if you like. Every town and every market has its own recipe, fiercely defended, and locals will drive well out of their way for a favorite maker. It is deeply, unmistakably Louisianan, tied to Cajun family and culture, and it is one of those wonderful foods that, for the most part, simply never left the state. 36. Louisiana, gumbo. If any single dish holds the whole soul of Louisiana, it is gumbo, a pot that carries the history of many peoples in every spoonful. It begins with a roux, flour and fat cooked together slowly, patiently, stirred without stopping, sometimes for an hour, until it darkens from blonde to peanut butter to a deep, nutty brown, the foundation everything else is built on. From there, it becomes a whole world of variation. Some gumbos are thickened with okra, brought over through West African cooking, some with file, ground sassafras leaves learned from the Choctaw, and they might carry sausage, chicken, or a bounty of Gulf seafood like shrimp, crab, and oysters. It reflects the French, African, Spanish, and Native American cultures that all met and mingled in Louisiana. Served over rice, it was Sunday food and funeral food, the pot a family kept going to feed anyone who walked through the door, from close kin to a neighbor stopping by. Every family had its own version, its own guarded proportions and secrets, handed down the generations. And that is its quiet tragedy too. Those recipes lived in the hands and memory of grandmothers, and as each generation passes, a little of that specific, irreplaceable gumbo knowledge is forgotten with them. Number 37. Maine, red snapper hot dogs. In Maine, a hot dog is not really a Maine hot dog unless it is bright, unmistakable red, and it snaps when you bite into it. These are the famous red snappers, made by a New England company for well over a century, dyed a vivid red with natural coloring and stuffed into a natural casing that gives them their signature loud crack and firm snap. You steam or grill them, and then you tuck them into a New England-style split-top bun, the kind that is cut on the top rather than the side, with flat, flavorful sides you can toast in butter. For generations of Maine kids, these red hot dogs were the taste of summer itself, cooked at lakeside camps, backyard cookouts, church suppers, and roadside stands all over the state, as ordinary and expected there as anything could be. But that shocking red color and the loud snap look almost alien to people from away, who are used to plain brown hot dogs. It is one more example of a food a whole state grew up on and considers completely normal, while the rest of the country has never seen anything like it. And even in Maine, the old red snapper is quietly less common than it used to be. 38. Maine, whoopie pie. A whoopie pie is not really a pie at all, but a soft, cakey sandwich cookie, and in Maine it is beloved enough to be the official state treat. It is made of two round, domed mounds of rich chocolate cake, tender and moist, with a thick layer of sweet, fluffy filling, traditionally a marshmallowy or buttercream cream sandwiched between them. The result is soft, sweet, and generous, something between a cake and a cookie, big enough to need two hands. The name has a charming legend behind it. They say farm and mill families packed them into lunch pails, and when a worker or a child opened their lunch and found one waiting, they would shout, "Whoopee!" with delight. Whether or not that is exactly true, the whoopie pie became a fixture of New England and Pennsylvania Dutch baking, and Maine embraced it as its own, selling them at country stores, fairs, and bake sales all over the state. Homemade, they were a plush, chocolatey reward. Today, though, most whoopie pies people encounter come wrapped in plastic off a shelf, dense and overly sweet, a pale imitation of the light, fresh, homemade version a Maine grandmother would pull from her oven, and that homemade tradition is slowly losing ground. 39. Maryland crab cakes. A real Chesapeake Bay crab cake is a thing of restraint, and that restraint is exactly what has been lost. In Maryland, where blue crabs from the Chesapeake are practically a religion, a proper crab cake is almost entirely crab, big, sweet lumps of hand-picked backfin meat, barely held together with just enough egg, a little mayonnaise, a shake of Old Bay seasoning, and a few cracker or breadcrumbs to keep it from falling apart, and no more. It is gently formed into a mound and then broiled or lightly pan-fried, often with a pat of butter, until the top is golden but the inside is still moist and full of tender crab. There is no thick breading to hide behind, no filler stretching out the meat, because the crab is the entire point and it is sweet enough to stand on its own. It was the taste of a Maryland summer, of crab feasts and bayside suppers. But great crab meat is expensive, and so over the years, cheaper cakes crept in, patted out with bread, mustard, and seasoning until they were more filler than crab. Those mostly bread versions sitting in grocery freezers today would truly embarrass any Maryland grandmother who knew what a real crab cake was supposed to be. 40. Maryland, Smith Island. Cake. Out in the Chesapeake Bay sits Smith Island, a tiny remote fishing community, and from it comes one of the most astonishing cakes in America. So beloved it was named Maryland's official state dessert. What makes it remarkable is its construction. Instead of 2 or 3 thick layers, a Smith Island cake is built from 8, 10, or even more impossibly thin layers of yellow cake, each one no thicker than a pancake, stacked one atop another with a layer of cooked chocolate fudge icing between every single one. The story is that the watermen's wives baked these cakes to send out with their husbands during the long autumn crabbing and oystering season, and they used a cooked fudge icing rather than a fluffy frosting precisely because it held up better and stayed fresh through days out on the water. The many thin layers meant more of that rich fudge in every slice. The result is a tall, dense, decadent cake with a dozen ribbons of chocolate running through it. But building it is genuinely laborious, requiring you to bake and stack all those delicate layers by hand. And that kind of patient, old-fashioned effort is exactly what makes it rare today. A labor of love from a vanishing island way of life. 41. Massachusetts, Boston baked beans. Boston did not earn the nickname Beantown by accident. It earned it from a pot of beans that goes back to the earliest colonial days. Boston baked beans are navy beans, slow-baked for hours, sometimes the better part of a day, with salt pork and a generous amount of molasses until they turn deep brown, tender and glossy, sweet and savory, all at once with a rich, sticky sauce. The molasses is the historical key. In colonial times, Boston was a hub of the molasses trade, so the sweetener was cheap and plentiful, and it flavored the region's cooking. There was also a practical, religious reason the dish took hold. The Puritans observed a strict Sabbath and would not cook on Sunday, so a devout family would bake a big pot of beans on Saturday, let it cook low and slow, and eat it Saturday night and again cold or warmed on Sunday, no cooking required. That made baked beans a weekly ritual across New England for generations. Humble, filling, and deeply tied to the culture. Now, of course, Boston baked beans mostly means a can you open without a thought, a far cry from the pot a New England cook once tended lovingly in a slow oven all day long. 42. Massachusetts, Boston cream pie. Here is a dessert with a misleading name and a genuinely historic birthplace. The Boston cream pie is not a pie at all, but a cake, and it was created at the Parker House Hotel in Boston back in the 1850s. The confusion over its name comes from the era when cakes and pies were often baked in the same round tin pans and the words were used loosely. What it actually is, 2 layers of light sponge or butter cake split and filled with a thick layer of smooth vanilla custard or pastry cream, and then topped not with frosting, but with a shiny poured chocolate glaze that drapes over the top. When you cut into it, you get soft cake, cool rich custard, and that snap of dark chocolate all in one bite. It was such a celebrated creation that Massachusetts eventually named it the official state dessert. In its heyday, it was a bakery centerpiece, a special occasion cake made with real cooked custard and real chocolate. But making proper pastry cream from scratch takes care and time, and the from-scratch version, with its genuine custard filling, has become almost extinct outside of a few dedicated bakeries, replaced by dry, hollow imitations that carry the famous name but little of the original's glory. 43. Michigan pasty. Up in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, the pasty is a folded hand pie. The word pasty is pronounced with a short A, like pastille, and it has roots that dig straight down into the region's copper and iron mines. It was brought over in the 1800s by Cornish immigrants from England, experienced miners who came to work the Upper Peninsula's mines and carried their traditional food with them. A pasty is a sturdy crust folded around a hearty filling of diced beef, potato, rutabaga, and onion, seasoned simply, then crimped shut along one edge into a thick, rope-like seal. That crimped edge was not just decoration, it was a handle. A miner deep underground, with filthy hands he could not wash, would hold the pasty by that thick crust, eat the rest, and throw the dirty handle away. The dense filling and crust made a complete, portable, filling meal that stayed warm for hours, sometimes kept warm against a shovel over a candle. Whole Upper Peninsula towns lived on pasties, and other immigrant groups, Finnish and others, adopted them too. They became the signature food of a hard-working mining culture. As the mines closed and that way of life faded, the pasty became more of a nostalgic roadside curiosity, a taste of a tough, proud world that has largely disappeared. 44. Michigan Coney dog. In Michigan, especially in Detroit and Flint, the Coney dog is a beloved institution. And here is the irony. Despite the name, it has nothing to do with Coney Island in New York. It was created by Greek and Macedonian immigrants who settled in Michigan in the early 1900s. A coney is a hot dog, usually a natural casing frank, with a snap, tucked into a bun and topped with a beanless all-meat chili sauce, a squirt of yellow mustard, and a handful of diced raw onion. Each coney restaurant guarded its own secret chili recipe, and the rivalries ran deep. In downtown Detroit, 2 famous coney places sat right next door to each other for decades, each insisting theirs was the original and the best. These Coney Islands were open late, cheap, and busy, feeding auto workers coming off the night shift, families out for a quick bite, and anyone in need of a hot, savory, satisfying dog for pocket change. They were woven into the daily rhythm of industrial Michigan life. But as the old family-run Coney stands age and close and tastes shift, these classic counters are disappearing one by one, taking a genuinely distinctive, immigrant-born piece of Michigan food culture with them. 45. Minnesota Tater Tot Hottish. In Minnesota, hottish is practically its own food group, and the crown jewel of them all is the Tater Tot Hottish, a one-pan casserole that has fed the state's families, churches, and communities for generations. The formula is beautifully simple and endlessly comforting. A layer of ground beef, browned, mixed with a can of condensed cream soup, usually cream of mushroom, and some vegetables like green beans or corn, all spread into a single baking dish and then topped with a complete, crispy roof of frozen tater tots lined up in neat rows. It bakes until the tots on top turn golden and crunchy, while everything underneath stays creamy and savory. What makes the hotdish so central to Minnesota life is not just the taste, but the role it plays. It is the dish you bring to a funeral, a church basement potluck, a new neighbor, a family in need. It is made in one pan, feeds a crowd, travels well, and comforts everyone. It is Midwestern hospitality in casserole form. But as busy families increasingly reach for takeout and delivery, the humble, homemade hotdish, that warm, communal, made with love pan, is being made less often, and a genuine piece of Minnesota's culinary soul is slowly fading. 46. Minnesota, Juicy Lucy. The Juicy Lucy is a Minneapolis original that took the ordinary cheeseburger and turned it inside out, literally. Instead of laying a slice of cheese on top of the patty, the cook seals the cheese inside the burger, sandwiching it between two thin patties and pinching the edges shut so the cheese is trapped in the middle. As it cooks, that cheese melts into a molten, lava-hot core, so when you bite in, you get a rush of gooey, scalding cheese from the center, and every experienced eater knows to wait a minute and take a careful first bite, or risk a burned mouth. It has been the stuff of local legend for decades, and the rivalry over it is famous. Two neighboring Minneapolis bars each claim to have invented it, and they even spell it differently. One Juicy Lucy and the other Juicy Lucy, partly just to needle each other, with regulars fiercely loyal to their side. That friendly, decades-long feud only made the burger more beloved in the Twin Cities. But for all its local fame, the Juicy Lucy stayed largely a Minnesota thing, and most of the country has never bitten into one and felt that dangerous, delicious burst of hidden melted cheese. 47. Mississippi Delta Hot Tamales. In the Mississippi Delta, that flat, fertile stretch of cotton country, there is a deeply rooted tradition of hot tamales, and they are distinct from the Mexican tamales most Americans picture. Delta tamales are made with a spiced cornmeal dough wrapped around seasoned meat, usually beef, but instead of being steamed dry, they are simmered, gently poached in a pot of seasoned, spicy broth, which makes them moister and gives them their own particular character. They are small, and you buy them by the dozen or the half dozen, often from carts, corner shops, and little shacks with hand-painted signs. The history is a rich mingling of cultures. Theories trace them to Mexican migrant laborers who came to pick cotton and shared their food with black field workers who adopted and adapted the dish into something uniquely their own, tied to the Delta's African-American and working-class heritage. For generations, they have been sold hot, cheap, and by the sackful, a genuine Delta institution with its own festival and fierce local loyalty. Yet outside the region, most people have no idea this tradition exists, a whole distinctive American tamale culture hiding in plain sight in the heart of Mississippi, still there, but far too little known beyond it. 48. Mississippi, Mississippi. Mud pie. Mississippi mud pie is a dessert as rich, dark, and dense as the muddy banks of the great river it is named for, and that muddy look is exactly where it got its name. It is an intensely chocolate pie, and while recipes vary from kitchen to kitchen, the classic version is built in decadent layers, often a crust or a fudgy, brownie-like bottom, topped with a gooey chocolate filling or pudding, sometimes chocolate cake and ice cream too, all of it so dark and thick and cracked on top that it genuinely resembles cracked river mud. It is a Southern potluck and church supper staple, the kind of over-the-top chocolate showstopper that someone always brought to a gathering and that disappeared before anything else on the dessert table. Made from scratch, with real melted chocolate and homemade filling, it was a serious, indulgent treat, the reward at the end of a big Sunday meal. But like so many beloved homemade desserts, the real thing has increasingly been replaced by shortcuts, box mixes, tubs of frozen whipped topping, and instant pudding standing in for the slow-cooked layers, so that the genuine, decadent, made-by-hand Mississippi mud pie a grandmother once labored over grows rarer all the time. Number 49, Missouri, gooey butter cake. Gooey butter cake is a St. Louis original, and the story of its creation is the story of a happy accident. Sometime back in the 1930s or 40s, a St. Louis baker was said to be mixing up a batch of cake or coffee cake and got the proportions wrong, reversing the amounts of butter and flour or adding too much of the wrong ingredient. Instead of throwing out the mistake, he baked it and sold it anyway, and it turned out to be wonderful. The result is a flat, dense, rich cake with a firm, chewy bottom crust and a soft, sticky, almost custardy top layer, gooey in the middle, exactly as the name promises, and finished with a heavy dusting of powdered sugar. It was born partly out of Depression-era thriftiness, a way to use up dough and turn a baking error into something sellable, and it became a beloved fixture of St. Louis bakeries, sold in flat squares, a coffee cake treat generations of locals grew up on. It is one of those foods that a whole city adores and considers utterly its own, yet almost nobody outside St. Louis has ever heard of, let alone tasted, this sweet, sticky, gloriously gooey local specialty. 50. Missouri, toasted ravioli. Toasted ravioli, or toasted rav as St. Louisans call it, is another Missouri creation supposedly born of a kitchen mishap, this time on The Hill, the historic Italian-American neighborhood of St. Louis. As the story goes, a cook accidentally dropped a ravioli into hot oil instead of boiling water, and rather than waste it, fished it out, discovered it was delicious, and a new appetizer was born. Whatever the exact truth, the dish caught on and became a St. Louis staple. The ravioli, usually filled with meat, are breaded and deep-fried until the outside is crispy and golden brown, while the filling inside stays hot and savory, then dusted with grated Parmesan and served with a side of warm marinara sauce for dipping. Crunchy, cheesy, and satisfying, they were the appetizer at countless Italian-American restaurants and family gatherings, the thing you always ordered to start the meal, passed around the table before the pasta came. For a whole region, they were a beloved way to open a night out. But the freshly breaded, fried-to-order originals are a world apart from the frozen bags of toasted ravioli you can now buy at the grocery store. And that fresh, handmade version is increasingly hard to find outside its St. Louis home. 51. Montana, huckleberry pie. In Montana, the huckleberry is almost sacred, and the reason is simple. You cannot buy it from a farm because nobody has ever truly managed to tame it. Wild huckleberries grow only high in the mountains on their own stubborn schedule, refusing every attempt to cultivate them commercially, which means the only way to get them is to climb up there and pick them by hand. And that is exactly what Montana families did. All through August, they hiked into the high country with buckets and coffee cans, spent whole long days stooped over the low bushes, staining their fingers deep purple, competing with the bears who wanted the same berries, and hauled their haul back down the mountain to bake into pie. That effort, that day spent together on a mountainside, was the whole point of the thing, woven right into the flavor. A huckleberry pie tasted like tart wild fruit, and like a family tradition, and like a specific place all at once, the deep purple filling bubbling under a golden crust. As fewer people take the time to forage, as the old berry patches get harder to reach, and the knowledge of where to find them fades, both the pie and the ritual of picking, that made it possible are quietly slipping away. 52. Montana, Butte pork. Chop sandwich. The mining city of Butte, Montana was once one of the richest and roughest boomtowns in the American West. Its hills, honeycombed with copper mines that drew immigrants from all over the world, and out of that hard-working, hard-living place came a sandwich all its own. The Butte pork chop sandwich starts with a boneless pork loin cutlet, pounded thin, breaded, and fried until crisp and golden, then laid on a plain bun and dressed simply with yellow mustard, chopped onion, and a dill pickle. That is it, and that is all it needs. It was cheap, hot, and filling, exactly the kind of fast, hearty food a copper miner wanted at the end of a brutal shift underground, and it fed generations of those miners and their families. One family-run shop in Butte has been making them the same way since 1932, passing the recipe and the griddle down through the decades, a living monument to the city's working-class roots. It is a proud, greasy, unpretentious piece of labor history tied inseparably to Butte itself. And that is also why almost nobody outside Montana has ever tasted one, because this humble miner's sandwich never really left the town that invented it. 53. Nebraska Runza. The runza is Nebraska's own handheld meal, a food so tied to the state that it became a beloved fast food chain that exists almost nowhere else on Earth. Like its cousin, the Kansas Bierock, the runza came to the plains with the Volga Germans, ethnic Germans who had settled in Russia before emigrating to the American Midwest in the late 1800s, carrying their recipes across 2 continents. It is a pocket of soft, homemade yeast dough sealed completely around a savory filling of ground beef, shredded cabbage, onion, and seasoning, then baked until the bread is golden and the inside is hot and juicy. The sealed dough made it perfectly portable, a warm, self-contained lunch you could hold in one hand, which suited both hard-working farm families and, later, hungry fans. In Nebraska, the runza is practically a fall institution, sold by the thousands and eaten at Cornhusker football games on crisp autumn Saturdays, as much a part of game day as the team itself. The regional chain built around it keeps the tradition alive within the state's borders. But step outside Nebraska in almost any direction and mention a runza, and you will get a puzzled look, because this warm cabbage and beef-filled bun stayed almost entirely a Nebraska secret. Number 54. Nebraska Reuben sandwich. The Reuben is a sandwich known coast to coast, but a lot of people do not realize that Omaha, Nebraska, makes a strong claim to being its birthplace. As the story goes, sometime in the 1920s, a local grocer named Reuben Kulikowski was part of a regular late-night poker game at Omaha's Blackstone Hotel, and he supposedly threw together this sandwich as a hearty snack for the players, after which the hotel owner put it on the menu and named it for him. Whatever the exact truth, the sandwich itself is a masterpiece of contrasts. Corned beef, tangy sauerkraut, melted Swiss cheese, and creamy Russian dressing, all layered on rye bread and then grilled until the outside is crisp and buttery and the cheese inside melts everything together. Hot, salty, sour, and rich all at once, it became a diner and delicatessen staple across the entire country for decades, the kind of thing every luncheonette knew how to make. But somewhere along the way, it drifted out of fashion, and a properly built, properly griddled Reuben with quality corned beef and a genuine grilled crust has grown surprisingly hard to find, one more classic quietly slipping off the everyday American menu. Number 55. Nevada, Basque boarding house lamb stew. Most people think of Nevada as neon and slot machines, but the state has a deep and lesser-known heritage rooted in the lonely high desert, the Basque sheepherders. Immigrants from the Basque region between Spain and France came to Nevada to tend enormous flocks of sheep across the vast, empty rangeland, and when they came into town, they gathered at Basque boarding houses that served as their hotels, community centers, and dining halls all in one. The meals there were legendary, served family style at long communal tables where strangers sat elbow to elbow with jugs of hearty red wine passed up and down and course after course brought out. At the heart of it was a slow-cooked lamb stew. Tender chunks of lamb simmered for hours with garlic, peppers, onions, and tomato until the meat fell apart and the whole thing was rich and deeply savory, ladled out generously and passed hand to hand. Those boarding houses fed and held together an entire immigrant culture, a taste of home in a harsh and distant land. But as the old sheep-herding way of life faded and the herders' children moved on to other work, most of the boarding houses closed, and only a handful survive today, keeping a nearly vanished tradition barely alive. Number 56. Nevada Shrimp Cocktail. In the old days of Las Vegas, the casinos had a clever trick to keep gamblers happy and keep them at the tables, and that trick was the 50-cent shrimp cocktail. For decades, a spot on the Strip served a chilled shrimp cocktail in a classic tulip glass, small shrimp piled over cocktail sauce for just 50 cents, a price so low the casino was practically giving it away and often losing money on everyone. That was the point. It was a loss leader, a cheap luxury designed to lure hungry visitors in the door and keep them gambling, and it worked so well that it ran for many years and sold untold millions of glasses. For a whole generation, that little glass of cold shrimp was the taste of vintage Las Vegas, of a time when the town ran on cheap buffets, lounge acts, and small indulgences that made an ordinary person feel like a high roller for pocket change. It was pure old-school Vegas hospitality. But as the city reinvented itself into a place of celebrity chefs and expensive dining, those cheap classic cocktails almost entirely disappeared, and the 50-cent shrimp glass became a relic of a Las Vegas that no longer exists. Number 57. New Hampshire, American chop suey. Despite its name, American chop suey has nothing at all to do with Chinese cooking, and in New England, it was one of the most common weeknight dinners a family could put on the table. It is a simple, thrifty, one-pot dish. Elbow macaroni, ground beef browned with onion and green pepper, and canned tomatoes or tomato sauce, all stirred together into a warm, hearty, comforting skillet or casserole that stretched a small amount of meat to feed a whole family cheaply. The name is a bit of a mystery, likely just a period phrase meaning a hodgepodge or mixture thrown together, and every region and family had its own slight variation. In the old mill towns of New Hampshire and across New England, it was the reliable Tuesday night supper, the dish that showed up again and again because it was fast, filling, and made from ingredients every pantry already had. Kids grew up on it, ate it without a second thought, and remember it fondly as pure childhood comfort. And yet, precisely because it is so plain and so humble, it is the kind of dish people are almost a little embarrassed to admit they loved. And as tastes have changed, it has quietly slipped out of the regular rotation. 58. New Hampshire apple cider donuts. Autumn in New Hampshire has a smell, and for a lot of people that smell is apple cider donuts frying at the local orchard. When the apples come in and the leaves turn, the orchards and cider mills of New England fire up their fryers, and the donut they make is something special. Fresh apple cider is boiled down and concentrated to intensify its flavor, then worked right into a spiced cake donut batter along with cinnamon and nutmeg, so the tang of the apple carries through the whole thing. The donuts are fried until golden, and while they are still hot enough to burn your fingers, rolled in cinnamon sugar that clings to the warm surface. Eaten right there at the orchard on a crisp fall day, with a cup of cold cider in your other hand, they are one of the great simple pleasures of the season. And generations of New England families made the fall trip to the orchard a tradition built largely around getting a bag of them fresh. The mass-produced versions you find spinning under lights at a gas station or grocery store today have none of that fresh-pressed, just-fried, orchard-in-October soul that made the real thing so beloved. Number 59. New Jersey pork roll, egg and cheese. No breakfast sandwich is more deeply New Jersey than pork roll, egg and cheese, and few foods inspire a more passionate argument because in the northern part of the state people call it pork roll, while in South Jersey they insist on calling it Taylor ham, and the two sides will happily debate the name forever. Whatever you call it, the meat itself is a processed pork product, a New Jersey invention dating back to the 1800s, sold in a roll and sliced into rounds. The trick every Jersey cook knows is to cut a few notches into the edges of each slice before it hits the griddle, because otherwise it curls up into a cup as it cooks. Griddled until the edges go crisp and a little charred, it is stacked with a fried egg and melted American cheese on a soft roll or a hard Kaiser with salt, pepper, and ketchup to taste. It is the sandwich Jersey wakes up to, sold at every diner, deli, boardwalk stand, and corner store in the state, the taste of a Jersey morning. It is a genuine point of regional pride, and though it thrives at home, it remains a mystery to much of the rest of the country. Number 60. New Jersey disco fries. Disco fries are what New Jersey orders at 2 in the morning, and they belong body and soul to the state's legendary diner culture. The dish is simple and glorious. A plate of French fries smothered in rich brown gravy and blanketed with melted mozzarella cheese until the whole thing is a gooey, savory, molten pile. Picture the classic Canadian poutine, but with stretchy mozzarella instead of cheese curds and a diner's brown gravy. And you have the idea. New Jersey is famous for its diners, those big, chrome, open all-night institutions, and disco fries were the perfect late-night food to be eaten in one of those vinyl booths after a night out, cheap and hot, and exactly what a tired, hungry crowd craved in the small hours. The playful name evokes the neon, all-night energy of the era that made them popular. For decades, they were a fixture of the after-midnight menu, comfort food for the late shift and the last call. But New Jersey's great old diners have been closing at a steady, sad pace, priced out and worn down, and as those glowing chrome landmarks disappear one by one, this greasy, gooey, beloved institution is fading right along with them. 61. New Mexico green chile stew. If there is one flavor that defines New Mexico, it is roasted green chile, and green chile stew is its purest, most comforting expression. Every autumn across the state, the air fills with the unmistakable smell of chilies roasting in big, rotating drums, and families buy them by the sack, roast them, peel them, and freeze bags of them to last the whole year, because chile is not a seasoning there so much as a way of life. The stew itself is honest and simple. Those roasted green chiles simmered with chunks of pork, potatoes, onion, and garlic into a brothy, warming bowl that carries a slow, earthy, building heat and a depth of flavor that tastes like the land itself. It has deep roots in the native and Hispano cultures of New Mexico, cooked in home kitchens and served at little family restaurants for generations. The thing you eat when it is cold, when you are sick, when you just want to taste home. It is genuinely the soul of New Mexican cooking. And it is also intensely local, Because that specific New Mexico green chile, grown in places like Hatch, does not travel well or grow the same anywhere else. So the real stew, in all its glory, essentially stops at the state line. 62. New Mexico, sopapillas. In New Mexico, no plate of enchiladas or bowl of green chile stew is truly complete without a sopapilla alongside it. And this puffed pillow of fried dough plays a role most outsiders never understand. A simple dough is rolled out, cut into squares or triangles, and dropped into hot oil, where it puffs up dramatically, ballooning into a light, hollow, golden pillow that is crisp on the outside and airy inside. Served hot with the meal, it does double duty. You can tear off a piece to scoop up beans and chile, and crucially, when the green chili has set your mouth on fire, you tear open a sopapilla and drizzle honey inside. And that sweet, cooling bread is the perfect antidote to the heat. It is a close cousin to the fry bread found across the Southwest and in native communities, a centuries-old tradition rooted in the region's Hispano heritage. And for generations, it was simply on every table at every New Mexican meal, as expected as a fork. But as dining habits change and chain restaurants standardize their menus, that automatic basket of hot, honey-ready sopapillas has quietly disappeared from many tables, and a wonderful old tradition is slowly being served less and less. 63. New York spaghettis. Everyone knows New York City food, but few people, even in New York State, know about spaghettis, a beloved regional specialty concentrated almost entirely around the city of Binghamton in the state's southern tier. A spaghetti is deceptively simple. Cubes of meat, traditionally lamb, though chicken and pork became common, are marinated for a day or more in a tangy, herby marinade of oil, vinegar, garlic, and Italian seasonings, then threaded onto skewers and grilled over an open flame until charred and juicy. The signature way to eat one is pure genius in its plainness. You take a slice of soft Italian bread, wrap it around the skewer, and pull, using the bread like a mitt to slide the hot marinated meat right off and into a sandwich. Brought to the area by Italian immigrants, spaghettis became a fixture of summer, cooked at backyard cookouts, church festivals, and community gatherings, and Binghamton even holds an annual festival in their honor. They are woven into the identity of that particular corner of New York. Yet they are so impossibly regional that most people in the rest of New York State, let alone the rest of the country, have never heard of a spaghetti, making it one of America's best-kept local food secrets. 64. New York EGG cream. Here is a New York classic with a name that lies to you twice, because a real egg cream contains neither egg nor cream. It is a fizzy, frothy drink made from just 3 humble ingredients: cold milk, seltzer water, sheer, and chocolate syrup, traditionally the beloved local Fox's You Bet syrup. The magic is in the technique. You put a little milk and syrup in a glass, then blast in the seltzer with a strong spritz, and stir vigorously, and if you do it right, a beautiful white foamy head rises to the top so it looks almost like a beaten egg white, which may be where the misleading name came from. Sweet, chocolatey, cold, and effervescent, it was the everyday drink of working-class Brooklyn and the Lower East Side, sold for a nickel at the countless corner candy stores, luncheonettes, and soda fountains that once dotted every New York neighborhood. Kids drank them on stoops on hot summer days, and they were as much a part of the city's texture as anything. But as those old soda fountains and candy shops closed down across the decades, replaced by modern stores that had no fountain and no one who knew the trick, the egg cream faded away with them, a fizzy piece of old New York quietly lost. 65. North Carolina, liver mush. Liver mush is one of those foods that a small region loves fiercely and the rest of the world has mostly never encountered. And in the foothills of western North Carolina, it is a genuine point of pride. It is a product of old-fashioned thrift, born from the belief that when you butchered a hog, absolutely nothing should go to waste. Cooks took pork liver and scraps of head meat, cooked them down, and mixed them with cornmeal and seasonings like sage and black pepper, then packed the mixture into a loaf and let it set firm. To eat it, you slice the loaf, fry the pieces in a hot pan until they develop a crisp brown crust while staying soft inside, and serve them for breakfast alongside eggs, grits, or on a biscuit, often with a little mustard or syrup. It is a close cousin of Pennsylvania scrapple, but distinctly its own thing, unique to that stretch of the Carolina foothills. The region loves it enough to hold festivals celebrating it. But like a lot of nose-to-tail, waste-nothing foods born of hard times, liver mush makes squeamish modern eaters flinch, and its following, though loyal and passionate, is steadily shrinking as older generations pass on. 66. North Carolina, Eastern-style vinegar barbecue. Barbecue means 100 different things across America, but in Eastern North Carolina, it means something specific, ancient, and pure. So pure it can startle people used to sweet, thick, red barbecue sauce. In the Eastern-style tradition, the whole hog is cooked low and slow over wood coals for many hours until the meat is tender and smoky throughout. Then chopped up, every part of the pig mixed together. And here is the shock. It is dressed with nothing but a thin sauce of vinegar, black pepper, crushed red pepper, and a little salt. No tomato, no sugar, no molasses, no sweetness at all. This is barbecue from before sauces got sweet, a tradition that goes back centuries, and that sharp, peppery, vinegar-cut pork lets the flavor of the smoke and the meat itself take center stage. It was the food of community pig pickings, of little roadside joints where a pitmaster tended the fire all night. But cooking a whole hog over wood the old way is grueling, skilled, overnight labor, and the old pitmasters who know how to do it are aging and retiring, with fewer young people willing to take up the hard, hot, sleepless work. Slowly, that pure vinegar tradition is being lost. 67. North Dakota, Noefla soup. On the frozen northern plains of North Dakota, where winter can be genuinely deadly, Noefla soup was the kind of thick, warming, stick-to-your-bones food that helped families survive the cold, and it came, once again, from the German-Russian immigrants who settled that hard country. Noefla are small, homemade dumplings, and making them is a hands-on art. The cook mixes a simple dough and then pinches or cuts off little pieces by feel, dropping them into the pot so no two are exactly alike, and each grandmother has her own size and shape. Those dumplings simmer in a rich, creamy broth, thick with diced potatoes and onion, sometimes with a little chicken, until the whole thing turns into a hearty, comforting, almost stew-like soup, pale and filling and perfect against a plains blizzard. It was everyday food, cheap and made from staples, but it carried the warmth of home and heritage in every spoonful. You can still find Noefla soup on the menu at cafes and diners across North Dakota, a sign of how beloved it remains. But the true from-scratch version, with dumplings pinched by hand the old way, is quietly disappearing as the generation who learned it by feel grows older. 68. North Dakota lefse. Lefse is a soft, thin, delicate potato flatbread that Norwegian immigrants brought to the northern plains, and in North Dakota, with its deep Scandinavian roots, it became far more than a food. It became a cherished holiday ritual. Making lefse is a genuine labor of love and skill. Cooks start with mashed potatoes mixed with flour, butter, and cream into a dough, then roll each piece out incredibly thin, paper thin, on a special cloth-covered board with a grooved rolling pin, and carefully transfer it with a long, flat stick onto a hot griddle where it cooks quickly and develops soft brown spots. The result is a tender, pliable round that you spread with butter and sugar or sometimes cinnamon, then roll up and eat. Because it is so time-consuming and tricky, lefse was traditionally made in big batches around Christmas, with whole families gathering in the kitchen, one person rolling, one griddling, one stacking, turning an all-day marathon into a beloved multi-generational tradition. That togetherness was half the point. But as the Norwegian elders who mastered the technique pass away, fewer households carry on the practice, and this thin, soft, hand-rolled taste of Scandinavian heritage is made in fewer and fewer kitchens each year. 69. Ohio Cincinnati chili. Cincinnati chili is one of the most misunderstood and fiercely defended regional foods in America because it is not really the chili most people picture at all. It was created by Macedonian and Greek immigrants in the early 1900s, and it shows. The sauce is thin rather than thick, more of a spiced meat sauce than a stew, and it is seasoned with an unexpected, almost Mediterranean blend that can include cinnamon, cloves, allspice, and even a hint of chocolate, giving it a warm, aromatic, savory sweet character unlike any Texas or Western chili. And you do not eat it in a bowl by itself. You serve it ladled over a bed of spaghetti and then order it by the way. A two-way is chili on spaghetti, a three-way adds a huge mound of finely shredded cheddar, a four-way adds onions or beans, and a five-way adds both. That haystack of bright orange shredded cheese on top is the signature look. It utterly baffles outsiders who cannot understand chili on pasta with cinnamon in it, but it absolutely defines Cincinnati, sold at beloved local chili parlors all over the city. Cincinnatians love it with a fierce hometown loyalty, even as the rest of the country still cannot quite believe this strange and wonderful dish is real. 70. Ohio Buckeyes. Ohio's nickname is the Buckeye State, named for the buckeye tree and its distinctive nut, dark brown with a lighter tan circle, and the state's most beloved homemade candy is designed to look exactly like it. Buckeyes are made by rolling a sweet, rich peanut butter fudge into small balls, then dipping each one most of the way into melted chocolate, leaving a small circle of the pale peanut butter showing at the top, so the finished candy is the spitting image of the real nut. The combination of that creamy, sweet peanut butter center and the snap of chocolate coating is simple and irresistible, and the little peekaboo circle of peanut butter is what makes them instantly recognizable and endearing. In Ohio, making Buckeyes is a treasured holiday tradition, with families and church groups producing them by the tray at Christmas time, often as gifts, and they show up at every party and cookie exchange through the season. They were the kind of thing a grandmother and grandkids made together at the kitchen table, dipping each ball by hand. But as with so many homemade treats, convenience has crept in, and store-bought candies and pre-made versions have slowly been crowding out the homemade Buckeyes that once meant so much. 71. Oklahoma Fried Onion Burger. Born in the Great Depression in El Reno, Oklahoma, when every penny of meat had to stretch, cooks took a modest ball of ground beef, piled a fistful of thin-sliced onions on top, and smashed the whole thing hard onto a screaming hot griddle. The onions cooked down into the meat, caramelizing, their sweetness and moisture making a little beef go a long way, while adding tremendous flavor. The patty came out crispy-edged and sweet-savory, tucked into a soft bun, steamed over the cooking onions. It was survival food that tasted better than the real thing, but the old-time stands that still smash them out by hand are precious and few now. 72. Oklahoma Indian taco. The Indian taco has a history far more painful than its cheerful, fair food presence suggests. Fry bread was born of hardship. When native peoples were forced onto reservations and given meager government rations of flour, sugar, and lard, they made do by frying that flour into a puffy, golden bread. It came to carry both the trauma of that history and a deep sense of resilience. The taco piles that hot fry bread, open-faced, with seasoned beef, beans, cheese, lettuce, and tomato, and it draws long lines at powwows and fairs across Oklahoma and Indian country. For Native communities, it carries real pride. Outside those circles, most Americans have never had one or heard the hard story behind it. 73. Oregon Marionberry Pie. The Marionberry is Oregon's own berry, so local that most people outside the Pacific Northwest have never heard its name. It was bred in Oregon in the mid-20th century and named for the county where it was tested, and it turned out to be a spectacular blackberry, dark, glossy, and packed with an intense, tart flavor. Because it grows almost entirely in Oregon and does not travel well fresh, it stays a regional treasure, and its finest use is pie, a deep, almost black-purple filling bubbling under a flaky crust that stains your teeth. For Oregonians, it is the taste of summer. Off the West Coast, hardly anyone even knows the berry exists. 74. Oregon Dungeness Crab. Along the cold, wild Oregon coast, the Dungeness crab is a genuine local treasure, and the best preparations do almost nothing to it. These large, sweet crabs are pulled fresh from the frigid Pacific, then simply steamed hot or cracked cold with drawn butter and a squeeze of lemon. That clean, sweet ocean flavor was the centerpiece of coastal holiday feasts, where a crab feed brought the whole family around the table to crack shells together. Families drove right to the docks to buy them live, straight off the boats. But as cheap farmed and imported seafood flooded the market and fewer people make the trip, that ritual of a fresh crab feed grows quieter. 75. Pennsylvania Scrapple. Scrapple is the Pennsylvania Dutch masterpiece of thrift, built on the idea that when you slaughtered a hog, you used every last scrap, which is exactly where the name comes from. After the good cuts were taken, the trimmings and organ meats were simmered down, thickened with cornmeal and buckwheat, seasoned with sage and pepper, and set in loaf pans overnight. In the morning, you sliced it and fried the pieces until each side turned deep, crackling crisp, while the inside stayed soft, served with eggs and a drizzle of syrup or apple butter. It launched farmers and factory workers into long days, wasting nothing. But its organ meats make outsiders flinch, and the from-scratch tradition is fading even at home. 76. Pennsylvania Shoofly Pie. Shoofly pie is a Pennsylvania Dutch classic, a molasses pie so sweet that legend says it drew flies you had to shoo away. It was a cook's answer to the seasons. When there was no fresh fruit, a family could still make a satisfying pie from humble pantry staples, molasses, brown sugar, flour, valver, and lard. The filling is a gooey, rich molasses layer topped with a dry, buttery crumb, and folks debated the two styles, wet bottom and dry bottom, forever. Often it was eaten not as dessert, but at breakfast, dunked in hot coffee, the sweet and the bitter balancing perfectly. As the old Dutch cooking fades from everyday kitchens, this sticky pie is slipping into memory. 77. Rhode Island Coffee Milk. Tiny Rhode Island has an official state drink most Americans have never tried. Coffee milk, essentially the coffee-flavored answer to chocolate milk. You stir a few spoonfuls of sweet coffee syrup into a cold glass of milk, and you get a creamy, gently coffee-flavored drink, mild enough for kids, yet loved by adults. For generations, it was everywhere, poured at lunch counters and served in school cafeterias, so ordinary that whole generations grew up drinking it without ever realizing it was a strange local peculiarity the rest of the country had never heard of. It is coffee's gentle, sweet cousin, a genuine point of local pride and one of the most charmingly regional drinks in America. 78. Rhode Island hot wieners. In Rhode Island, if you want a certain beloved little hot dog, you go to a place with New York system in the name, and the first surprise is that it has almost nothing to do with New York. The wiener is small, a pork and veal blend in a natural casing, tucked into a soft steamed bun and dressed all the way with spiced meat sauce, mustard, chopped onion, and celery salt. The legendary part is the assembly. A counterman lines up a whole row of buns along his bare forearm, building a dozen at once in a blur. But those classic joints, with their arm-loading countermen and secret sauces, are a vanishing breed as the old owners retire. 79. South Carolina chicken bog. Chicken bog is a humble, soulful one-pot dish from South Carolina's Low Country and PD, and the name says it all, a dish so wet and loose with broth that the rice is practically bogged down in it. You simmer chicken and smoked sausage together, then cook rice right in that rich broth until it soaks up the flavor but stays soft and soupy. What makes it special is its role as community food, cooked in cast-iron pots big enough to feed a crowd at church suppers, reunions, and hunting camps for pennies a plate. Loris, South Carolina, even holds a festival for it. But outside the PD, chicken bog is almost completely unknown. 80. South Carolina she crab crab soup. She crab soup is the elegant jewel of Charleston, a silky bisque that captures the Low Country coast in a bowl. It starts as a creamy base of butter, milk, and cream, enriched with sherry, then filled with sweet blue crab meat from the surrounding waters. But the ingredient that gives it its name and character is the roe, the eggs of the female, or she crab, stirred in for a subtle briny richness and an orange tint. It was the sophisticated taste of Charleston, served in the city's grand old restaurants. But crab roe is hard to source and limited by conservation rules, so the true version, made with the very ingredient that made it famous, has become genuinely rare. 81. South Dakota chislic. Chislic is South Dakota's beloved and delightfully unusual official state nosh, a snack so tied to the state that it barely exists anywhere else. It is small cubes of red meat, traditionally lamb or mutton, seasoned and then deep-fried or grilled and served skewered on toothpicks, with saltine crackers, garlic salt, and an ice-cold beer. It is pure tavern finger food, the thing you order at a bar to share while you talk, popping the cubes off one after another. German-Russian immigrants brought it to the prairie in the late 1800s, and the name traces back to a Central Asian word for skewered meat. But it stayed so contained that almost nobody outside the Dakotas has ever tasted it. 82. South Dakota Kuchen. Kuchen, whose name simply means cake in German, is a custard-filled sweet the German-Russian settlers brought to South Dakota, and the state loved it enough to name it the official state dessert. A sweet, tender yeast dough is shaped into a shallow shell filled with rich egg custard, often with fruit like peaches, prunes, or rhubarb, and sprinkled with cinnamon and sugar before baking. The result sits somewhere between a cake, a pie, and a pastry, comforting and homey. Grandmothers baked it by the dozen for holidays, each with her own honed technique. But a proper Kuchen takes real time and skill, and as that generation ages out, The homemade version is slowly disappearing from the table. 83. Tennessee, Nashville. Hot chicken. Nashville hot chicken has become a worldwide phenomenon, but its origins are pure Nashville legend. The story goes that a man named Thornton Prince was a notorious womanizer, and after one late night, his scorned girlfriend tried to punish him by dousing his fried chicken in a punishing amount of cayenne. The plan backfired. He loved it and built a restaurant around it. The Bash's fried chicken, coated in a searing paste of cayenne and hot lard, deep red and seriously spicy, served on plain white bread with pickles to cut the burn. It was a beloved specialty of Nashville's black community for decades. Now that it has gone global, its local black-founded roots are too often forgotten in the rush to copy it. Number 84. Tennessee, banana pudding. Banana pudding is a fixture at every Southern potluck, church supper, and reunion, and the real from-scratch version is a thing of beauty. It starts with a proper cooked custard, egg yolks, sugar, milk, and vanilla stirred patiently until silky, then layered in a big dish with ripe banana slices and vanilla wafers, often crowned with browned meringue or whipped cream. Then it chills, and here is the magic. The wafers soften and absorb the custard, turning cake-like so the whole thing melds into something creamy and dreamy. It was the sweet everyone looked forward to. But the cooked custard version takes time, and it is increasingly replaced by instant boxed pudding and tubs of whipped topping. Convenient, but hollow. 85. Texas, Frito pie. Frito pie is a gloriously humble, gloriously portable Texas favorite, and in its most iconic form, you do not even need a plate. You split an individual bag of Fritos right down the side and pour chili, shredded cheese, and diced onions straight in, then eat it with a plastic fork out of the foil. That walking taco style made it perfect for Friday night football games, county fairs, and lunch counters across Texas, cheap and hot and easy to carry through a crowd. The chips soften under the warm chili while keeping some crunch. Both Texas and New Mexico claim it. Made right, with real Texas chili, it is a world away from the sad, mass-produced stadium versions. 86. Texas, kolaches. Central Texas holds a large, proud community descended from Czech immigrants, and the soft pastry they brought, the kolache, fills the bakeries of towns between Austin, Houston, and San Antonio. A true kolache is a pillowy, slightly sweet yeast dough bun with a well in the center, filled with fruit like apricot, prune, or poppy seed, or sweet cream cheese, then baked golden. Whole towns embrace the heritage, and places like West Texas hold kolache festivals. But an important distinction is being lost. The popular sausage-filled version many Texans now call a kolache is actually a different pastry called kielbasa. As the two blur together and convenience store versions spread, the true fruit kolache and its proper name are being forgotten. Number 87. Utah, funeral potatoes. Funeral potatoes have one of the most darkly charming names in American cooking, and it tells you everything about their role in Utah's Latter-day Saint community. It is a rich casserole of shredded hash browns, bound in cream soup, sour cream, and cheese, topped with a crunchy layer of crushed cornflakes or chips, and baked until bubbly and golden. They earned the name because church women's groups made them in enormous quantities to feed grieving families at the luncheons after funerals, an edible form of comfort and care in a time of loss. Over time, they spread to potlucks and holidays, but the name stuck. It is a cornerstone of Utah church cooking, yet outside that world, few have ever heard of it. 88. Utah, fried scones. Order a scone in Utah and you will not get the crumbly British biscuit, you will get a piece of fried bread. The tradition traces back to the pioneers, thrifty cooks who took leftover bread dough, patted it into pieces, and fried it in hot oil until it puffed into golden, pillowy, slightly chewy rounds, crisp outside and airy inside. Served hot, the classic way is drizzled with honey butter that soaks into the warm bread, though some use jam or powdered sugar. It is a close cousin of fry bread and sopapillas, born of the same make-do pioneer spirit. But the national chains never adopted it, so beyond Utah, hardly anyone knows a scone could mean a puff of honey-drizzled fried dough. 89. Vermont, sugar on snow. Sugar on snow is one of the most magical, fleeting food traditions in America, tied entirely to Vermont's maple sugaring season in early spring. When the sap runs and snow is still on the ground, you boil pure maple syrup until it is hot and thick, then drizzle it in ribbons over a pan of clean, packed snow. The instant it hits the cold, it seizes into a chewy, taffy-like candy that you twirl up onto a fork and eat right there, sweet and warm cold at once. It comes with a sour pickle and a plain donut to cut the sweetness. It was a whole seasonal ritual at the sugar house. But as winters grow warmer and less reliable, that fragile window is quietly threatened. 90. Vermont, maple creamy. In Vermont, a creamy is the local word for soft serve, and the maple creamy, made with the state's famous pure syrup, is about as close to a taste of Vermont in a cone as you can get. What sets it apart is that real maple syrup is churned right into the base, giving it a rich, mapley flavor and a smooth texture that tastes unmistakably of the place. You find them at roadside stands, dairy bars, and sugar houses all across the state, swirled tall into a cone, a simple pleasure and a genuine point of pride. The creamy is happily still around, but many places now use artificial maple flavoring instead of real syrup, so the genuine article is getting harder to find among the imitations. Number 91. Virginia country ham. Virginia country ham is one of America's oldest and most intense cured meats, a world apart from the mild, wet, pink ham at the grocery store, and Smithfield is its most famous home. A whole ham is packed in salt to draw out moisture, then aged for months, sometimes a year or more, developing an intensely salty, deep red, almost funky flavor closer to a Spanish or Italian dry-cured ham. Because it is so powerful, it is sliced paper-thin and used sparingly, and the classic way to eat it is tucked into a soft biscuit, the salt and the butter balancing perfectly. It was Christmas and Easter food. But making real aged ham takes time and skill, so the slow-cured tradition is being replaced by mild grocery ham. Number 92. Virginia peanut soup. Virginia peanut soup is a creamy, savory, surprising dish with roots in both colonial history and West African tradition, and it is one of the more genuinely forgotten foods on this list. Virginia is major peanut country, and the soup makes those peanuts the star. Ground peanuts blended into a broth with butter, onion, celery, and cream, then simmered smooth and nutty and finished with chopped peanuts, savory rather than sweet. Its history is poignant. Peanut soups came to America through the cooking of enslaved West Africans, for whom the ground nut was a staple, and it became tavern food for centuries. You can still find it at Colonial Williamsburg. But almost nobody makes it at home anymore, and most Americans have never tasted it. Number 93. Washington razor clam fritters. Along the wild Pacific beaches of Washington, digging razor clams is a cherished ritual that pulls families out onto the cold, wet sand, and the fritters are the reward. Razor clams burrow fast, so digging is genuine work, and you head out at low tide, spot the telltale show in the sand, and dig quickly with a narrow shovel or a clam gun before the clam escapes. Then the clams are cleaned, chopped, mixed into a simple batter, and pan-fried into savory golden fritters, sweet and briny, the perfect hot meal after a cold morning. The clam digs themselves were the tradition as much as the eating. But as fewer people take up the muddy work, both the ritual and the fritters are fading from the coast. Number 94. Washington Applets and Cotlets. Applets and Cotlets are a soft, chewy fruit and nut candy that became Washington's signature sweet, and their story is a wonderful piece of immigrant history. In the early 1900s, 2 Armenian immigrants settled in Washington's apple country and, faced with a glut of fruit, adapted a traditional Armenian confection, much like Turkish delight. Applets came from apples and walnuts, cotlets from apricots, both cooked into a tender, jelly-like candy dusted all over in powdered sugar. Made by a family company in the little town of Kashmir, they became a beloved fixture of holiday gift boxes, mailed to relatives as a taste of Washington. But the historic company that made them for over a century recently closed, putting these powdered sugar candies in real danger of disappearing. Number 95. West Virginia Pepperoni Roll. The pepperoni roll is West Virginia's proud, unofficial state food, and it was born, fittingly, in the coal mines. In the early 1900s, Italian immigrants working the coal fields needed a lunch they could carry deep underground, one that kept for hours without refrigeration and could be eaten with dirty hands. The answer was brilliant in its simplicity: soft bread dough baked with sticks of pepperoni tucked right inside. As it baked, the pepperoni released its spicy grease into the bread, flavoring it from within, and the roll was self-contained and satisfying, needing nothing else. For a century, it fed the miners and their families. It is still beloved within the state, but crossed the state line, and most Americans have never heard of it. 96. West Virginia, fried ramps and potatoes. In the West Virginia mountains, spring announces itself with ramps, a wild, pungent, garlicky, oniony plant that pushes up through the forest floor. Ramps, also called wild leeks, have a flavor so strong it famously lingers on your breath for a day or two after a good mess of them. Families dug them from the hills, then fried them with potatoes and bacon grease into a hearty, intensely savory dish that tastes powerfully of the mountains and the season. Ramp season became an occasion for community ramp suppers, where whole towns gathered to celebrate the first green of spring. But ramps grow slowly and are easily overharvested, and as their popularity spreads and the old know-how fades, both the wild patches and the suppers are being thinned out. Number 97. Wisconsin, Butter Burger. In Wisconsin, America's dairy state, the local burger leans unapologetically into butter. At its heart, it is a griddled patty on a bun, generously toasted in butter until it is rich and golden, and in the fullest versions, a pat of butter sits right on top of the hot patty, melting down into the meat and dressing every bite in dairy richness. The result is simple, indulgent, and deeply satisfying. A burger that celebrates exactly what Wisconsin is famous for. Butter burgers were the specialty of the state's old supper clubs and family-run drive-ins, where the griddle had been seasoned by generations and everyone knew the cook. But as those family-run stands close and national chains move in, the classic butter burger is slowly disappearing. 98. Wisconsin, Booyah. Booyah is a Wisconsin community tradition as much as a dish, an enormous, slow-simmered stew with Belgian roots, especially around Green Bay. What makes it remarkable is the scale. It is made in gigantic kettles, some the size of a bathtub, cooked to feed not a family, but a whole crowd, hundreds of people at a time. Chicken, beef, and a mountain of vegetables simmer together low and slow, often for 2 days, until everything melts into a thick, hearty stew. It takes a whole crew of booyah cooks tending the fires in shifts, which is the point, because booyah was made as fundraiser and gathering food for churches and fire departments. But those 2-day, all-hands cook-ups are labor-intensive, and the giant community booyah is slowly becoming a thing of the past. Number 99. Wyoming pan-fried trout. In Wyoming, with its cold mountain streams and vast open country, one of the truest tastes of the place is pan-fried trout. And part of what made it so good was that you had to earn it. Traditionally, this was food you caught yourself. A cutthroat pulled from an icy stream, cleaned right on the bank, and cooked within hours when it was at its absolute freshest. The preparation was rustic and perfect. Roll the whole fish in cornmeal, season it and fry it in a cast iron pan over a campfire until the skin was crisp and the flesh flaky and sweet. Eaten outdoors on a cool morning, it was as much an experience as a meal. But as fewer families fish and camp the old way, that hands-on tradition is quietly slipping away. 100. Wyoming chokecherry. Syrup. Out on the Wyoming plains grows the chokecherry, a small, dark, wild fruit far too tart to eat off the bush, so bitter it makes your mouth pucker, and the pioneers turned their resourcefulness on it and made something wonderful. They gathered the wild berries by the bucketful in late summer, cooked them down with plenty of sugar, and strained out the pits and skins to make a deep red, glossy syrup, turning a harsh little berry into a sweet tart treasure. It went over pancakes, waffles, and biscuits, a homemade taste of the wild landscape, and was also made into jelly. Every fall, ranch grandmothers put up jars to last the year. But almost nobody forages and cooks them down anymore, so this beautiful old tradition has very nearly been forgotten. Here is the challenge. Pick one from your state and make it this week. The chicken bog, the hottish, the fried onion burger, the boiled peanuts. Then drop it in the comments and tell me which 2 I got wrong for your state, because somebody's grandmother made something I missed. These were not just meals. They were the taste of a country that fed itself with almost nothing, and we are the last ones who can still remember them.